She's at the kids' table. I heard my cousin cackle as I stared at the booster seat with my name on it, Laura Bennett, 45, crammed between sippy cups and superhero placemats. Valerie, my stepmother, swept past in pearls and poison. "We had to prioritize," she whispered, grinning, while my father stared at the band like I didn't exist. But that wasn't the worst part. The will? Already rewritten. My children's college funds, gone. Transferred without a word. Valerie didn't just humiliate me. She erased me. But I have every receipt, every voicemail, every signature. And the date circled in red. She thinks she won. She has no idea what's coming. My name is Laura Bennett, and I'm 45 years old. I live in a modest Limassol apartment with my 2 children, where morning coffee and color-coded school calendars mark our fresh start after the divorce. My father Richard once, my strongest ally, married Valerie Chen last spring, a woman 15 years my junior who swept into his life trailing Chanel perfume and investment suggestions. My teenagers, Sarah and Michael, barely made her radar, except when she'd accidentally exclude them from family gatherings. My desk drawer holds every receipt, every voicemail from Dad praising my sensible choices, and every document showing exactly where his money flowed since Valerie arrived. The scent of brewing coffee steadies my hands as I review these papers one more time. But let me start from the beginning. The wedding reception was held at the Royal Apollonia, all crystal chandeliers and polished marble. I smoothed my navy dress, the one I'd carefully chosen to be appropriate without drawing attention, and made my way to the escort card display. The calligraphy-covered cards were arranged on tiny easels, sorted, alphabetically, against a backdrop of white orchids. My fingers traced along the B's, expecting to find Bennett Laura grouped with the other family members. Nothing. I double-checked, then triple-checked. My heart started to pound as I scanned the other letters, wondering if there had been some mistake. That's when I spotted it, tucked away in a corner, my name card, sitting alone next to a cluster of booster seats and boxes of crayons. "Thy children's table. You know that feeling when your stomach drops and your throat closes up? That's exactly what hit me as I stood there, frozen, staring at that little piece of cardstock that might as well have been a slap in the face. "Oh, Laura, I see you've found your seat assignment." Valerie's voice dripped honey as she glided up beside me in her designer wedding gown. Her practiced smile never quite reached her eyes. "We had to prioritize, you understand." Space at the family table was so limited with all the important guests. I glanced toward my father, hoping, praying, really, that he'd intervene. But there he was, 20 feet away, seemingly fascinated by the band setting up their guitars. He didn't even look my way. Remember when we used to have Sunday brunches, just the 2 of us? He'd always pull out my chair first, calling me his favorite dining companion. The whispers started immediately. I felt phones pointing in my direction, not even trying to be subtle. My cousin Jennifer's laugh cut through the murmur of voices, sharp as broken glass. "Oh my God, is she really sitting with the kids?" My neck burned as I lowered myself into one of the tiny chairs, my knees practically touching my chest. The table was decorated with cartoon characters and plastic cups with built-in straws. A little boy to my right was already using his place card as a paper airplane. When the salad course arrived, I couldn't swallow a single bite. Instead, I watched my father at the head table, surrounded by Valerie's friends and business associates. He used to tell me I was his rock, the sensible one who always made him proud. Now he couldn't even meet my eyes across the room. Something shifted in me then, sitting there between the juice boxes and dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets. The humiliation crystallized into something harder, something with edges. I'd spent so many years being the good daughter, the responsible one, always careful not to rock the boat. But dignity isn't something you should have to beg for, is it? I left before they cut the cake. The drive home was a blur, but I remember the quiet of my apartment, checking on my sleeping kids. Sarah had her debate team papers spread across her bed, and Michael's chemistry textbook was still open on his desk. They deserved better than watching their mother be erased. At my own desk, I pulled out an index card, the kind I used to make flashcards for the kids when they were younger. In precise letters, I wrote 2 words: grow larger. Not just for me, but for Sarah and Michael too. We weren't going to be pushed into the corners of our own family story. I crossed to the kitchen and looked at the calendar hanging by the fridge. The will reading was circled in red, 3 weeks away. As I stared at that date, my hand steady now, I thought about how Valerie had smiled when she said, prioritize, like it was nothing, like I was nothing. If she could so casually seat me with toddlers at my own father's wedding, what else did she have planned? I woke up the next morning to cold coffee and a headache that felt like it was trying to crack my skull from the inside out. You ever notice how humiliation has this way of feeling worse after you've slept on it? The wedding reception kept playing in my head like some twisted highlight reel. The snickers, the phone cameras, those knowing looks passed between Valerie's friends. The worst part? My father's face. Or rather, his deliberate effort not to show me his face at all. The same man who'd taught me how to balance a checkbook at age 12, who'd called me his voice of reason through every family crisis, couldn't even spare me a glance while I sat wedged between sippy cups and superhero placemats. "Mom, we're out of cereal," Michael called from the kitchen, snapping me back to reality. The mundane normalcy of a Monday morning felt surreal after everything. I'd forgotten to grocery shop, too wrapped up in wedding preparations that now felt like some elaborate joke at my expense. After getting the kids off to school, I sat at my computer, staring at a blank email. The cursor blinked at me for 20 minutes before I started typing. Dad, last night was difficult. Being seated at the children's table felt like a clear message about where I stand in your life now. I've always respected your choices, including your marriage to Valerie. But this public humiliation crossed a line. Could we please talk privately about this? Love, Laura. I read it over 6 times, tweaking words here and there, professional enough to show I wasn't having a meltdown, but direct enough to name the hurt. Remember when writing letters meant actually putting pen to paper? Dad used to help me draft important ones at his old roll-top desk, the one that smelled like leather and pipe tobacco. The response came 3 hours later, not from my father, but from Valerie's email address. My stomach clenched before I even opened it. Dearest Laura, I'm so sorry for any confusion about the seating arrangements. We had such a wonderful celebration, and I'm sad to hear you felt uncomfortable. I've attached a lovely photo of the head table. Doesn't your father look happy? Perhaps we can all have lunch soon to catch up properly. Best wishes, Valerie. The photo loaded, my father beaming at the head table, Valerie's hand possessively on his arm, surrounded by her college friends and business associates. Not a single empty chair in sight. I drafted 3 responses. The first was pure acid. The second was a point-by-point breakdown of her manipulation. The third was a simple request to speak with my father directly. I deleted them all. Some silences speak volumes, and I'd save my words for the will consultation next week. That morning, I chose my outfit with surgical precision. A charcoal, gray suit I'd bought for client presentations, pearl earrings that had been my mother's, sensible heels that wouldn't betray any nervousness. I wanted to project composure, not the anger simmering beneath my skin. The law office smelled like expensive leather and air conditioning. Mr. Patterson's secretary led me to the conference room, where my father and Valerie were already seated. She'd claimed the chair closest to him, of course, her red, manicured fingers resting on his arm, just like in that photo. Laura, my father nodded, finally meeting my eyes. There was something uncertain in his expression, something that made my chest tight. I sat down across from them, placing my hands flat on the mahogany table. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat, shuffling the folders in front of him. One was significantly thicker than the others, its tab marked with unfamiliar numbers instead of names. "Shall we begin?" he asked, sliding a document across the polished surface. My eyes fixed on the paper, scanning for my name among the legal terms. It wasn't there. "As you can see," Mr. Patterson began, his tone carefully neutral, Your father has restructured his assets for maximum efficiency. The primary accounts have been transferred into joint ownership with Mrs. Bennet. Please call me Valerie, she interrupted with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. With Valerie, he corrected himself, for simplicity in managing day-to-day affairs. My throat went dry. Joint ownership? When did this happen? The paperwork was finalized last month before the wedding. Mr. Patterson shuffled through his stack of documents. Everything's been properly recorded and filed. I watched Valerie's gold pen dance across the forms he placed before her, her signature flowing with practiced confidence. Each flourish felt like a nail in some coffin I hadn't known was being built. Dad kept his eyes fixed on the papers, his shoulders slightly hunched, a posture I'd never seen in him before. What about the education fund? My voice came out steadier than I felt. The trust you set up for Michael and Emma's college? I directed this question straight at my father, but Valerie answered. We've had to make some adjustments to the estate. Planning, she said smoothly. Times change, priorities shift. You understand. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat again. Your father has made certain estate planning choices that reflect his updated intentions. The careful way he chose his words made my stomach twist. The previous arrangements have been consolidated into the main estate for more flexible management. Consolidated, updated intentions. Such gentle words for such brutal changes. You know those moments when you realize you're watching something precious slip through your fingers? That's what it felt like, sitting there in that leather chair that suddenly felt too small. Dad? I tried one more time. He finally looked at me, started to speak, but Valerie's hand squeezed his arm. We should get going, darling. That lunch appointment? The sunlight outside the office building hit me like an interrogation lamp. I found a bench and pulled out my notebook, the same one I'd used to track every penny during my divorce. Old habits die hard, and thank God for that. My hand shook slightly as I wrote. Date, April 15th. I pulled out my phone and called Dad's number. 1 ring, 2 rings, then that new voicemail message. Hi, you've reached James and Valerie Bennet. We can't come to the phone right now. I hung up before the cheerful music finished playing. The drive home was a blur of yellow lights and task lists forming in my head. First, confirm exact ownership structures of all accounts. Second, request complete statements going back 6 months. Third, figure out how to get Dad alone for 10 minutes without Valerie running interference. At home, I went straight to my bedroom closet and pulled out the old shoebox where I keep important papers. Under the birth certificates and insurance policies was a yellowed note in Dad's careful handwriting, dated from when I'd started my first job. Laura, I'm proud of how you handle money. Always keep records, always plan ahead. Your prudence will serve you well. Love, Dad. My eyes burned, but I refused to let tears fall. If there's one thing divorce teaches you, it's that crying doesn't fix bank accounts. I spread everything across my desk. The notes from today's meeting, Dad's old letter, my own, financial records. The gulf between the father who wrote that note and the man who wouldn't meet my eyes today felt vast enough to swallow me whole. A text notification lit up my phone. Hope you're not upset about the minor changes, just trying to streamline things. V. I set my phone face down and stared at the papers before me. If ownership could move so easily in one direction, was there any way to unmove the promises made to my children? The next morning, I started calling Dad's number before my coffee had finished brewing. You know that hollow feeling when you're reaching for someone who should be there but isn't? Yeah, that's what each ring felt like. James and Valerie Bennett's residence, her voice chirped on the 4th try. Hi, Valerie, it's Laura. Is Dad available? Oh, Laura, he's resting right now. Doctor's orders. We're being very careful about his stress levels. My fingers tightened around the phone. When would be a better time to call? I'll have him ring you when he's up to it. The line went dead before I could respond. I tried again at lunch, and mid-afternoon, and early evening. Each time Valerie answered with increasingly creative versions of he's resting. Ever notice how some people can make politeness sound like a weapon? Finally, I sat down and composed an email. Dad, I'd like to schedule a 30-minute meeting with you to discuss the recent changes to the education funds. Just us. Anytime that works for you in the next week. Love, Laura. The reply came from Valerie's email address within minutes. Dear Laura, James needs his rest and recovery time respected. All financial matters can be directed through proper channels. We trust you understand the importance of maintaining healthy boundaries during this transition period. Best, Valerie. The word boundaries made my teeth ache. I grabbed my car keys and headed to the bank where Dad had set up the education accounts years ago. The same accounts he'd shown me proudly when Michael was born, telling me how his grandchildren's futures were secure. Mrs. Chen, the branch manager, had known me for years. Her face said everything before she pulled up the records. I'm sorry, Laura. The educational trust accounts were reallocated last week. The funds were transferred to a joint household account. The fluorescent lights suddenly felt too bright. Without notification? The primary account holder has that authority. She lowered her voice. If it helps, I question the timing myself. Next stop, my kids' school. The guidance counselors were sympathetic but realistic. They outlined payment plans, scholarship options, and the brutal math of private education. Costs. I sat there scribbling numbers while my chest got tighter. By 3 o'clock, I was sitting across from Thomas Reed, a general practice attorney who'd helped a friend through her divorce. The consultation fee alone made me wince. To challenge these transfers, we're looking at a minimum retainer of $5,000, he said, tapping his pen against a yellow legal pad. That's just to start. If it gets contentious— When, I corrected. Not if. He nodded slowly. When it gets contentious, we could be looking at significant additional costs. Back home, I spread my monthly budget across the kitchen table. Rent, utilities, groceries, car payment, insurance. The numbers refused to stretch. Even with my emergency fund, a legal battle would eat through everything I'd rebuilt since the divorce. The shame crept up my neck like static electricity. Here I was again, scraping by, counting. Pennies. Trying to explain to my kids why things had to change. I'd promised them we were done with that chapter. But you know what's worse than shame? Silence. Silence had already cost us our security, our promises, our direct line to Dad. Silence was exactly what Valerie was counting on. I pulled out my laptop and started a new document. Timeline of events and supporting documentation. For the next 3 hours, I logged every interaction. Every email, every account change. I scanned old letters from Dad about the education funds, backed up voice messages where he'd discussed the trusts, attached bank statements showing the original arrangements. The file grew larger as the sun set. My coffee went cold beside me, but I kept typing. Each entry felt like another brick in a wall between what was promised and what was stolen. When the document hit 20 pages, I paused to check my dwindling account balance. The numbers stared back, cold and clear. I had maybe 2 months of legal fees in my savings. After that, the math turned ugly. I sat back, rubbing my eyes. The question wasn't just about starting this fight anymore. It was about what would happen when the money ran out, and whether I could find a way to make it last long enough to matter. Ever notice how hope gets expensive? I sure did, staring at that engagement letter from Thomas Reed's office. The retainer amount made my hands shake, but I focused on the scope limitations we'd negotiated: targeted discovery requests, minimal motion practice, clear exit ramps if costs spiraled. No blank checks here, just careful steps toward answers. Initial document demands and interrogatories only, I read aloud, pen hovering over the signature line. Maximum 20 billable hours per month unless authorized. The leather chair in Reed's office creaked as I leaned forward to sign. Smart to keep it contained, he said, collecting the papers. We'll start with standard requests, account statements, transfer authorizations, communication records. I nodded, already mentally cataloging the folders waiting at home. I've got everything organized by date and category. That night, my friend Sarah called as I was labeling yet another digital folder of emails. Laura, honey, I'm worried about you. All these legal fees. Is it worth the stress? You didn't see Dad's face at that will reading, I said, clicking through timestamps. He couldn't even look at me. Maybe that's exactly why you should let it go, for your own peace of mind. My fingers paused over the keyboard. The same suggestion had come from 3 other friends this week. Surrender for sanity's sake. Accept the new reality. Move on. I glanced at my bank statement, the numbers burning into my retinas. The retainer payment had carved a crater in my savings. 2 months of this, maybe 3 if I cut every corner. Then what? Around midnight, exhaustion hit hard. I'd been scanning old voicemails from Dad, converting them to text files for the attorney. His voice from last Christmas. You've always been so practical, Laura. Just like me. We know the value of planning ahead. The irony tasted bitter. I pushed back from the desk and walked to the bookshelf where his photo sat. Dad in his workshop, teaching Michael how to use a lathe. His smile was real then, proud and present. Not like the hollow version I'd seen at the wedding. What happened to us? I whispered to the frame. The silence felt heavy enough to crack ribs. Maybe my friends were right. Maybe this whole legal campaign was just expensive denial. I sank onto the couch, suddenly overwhelmed by the futility of it all. One middle-aged woman with dwindling resources fighting a battle that could end in bankruptcy. For what? Dignity? Recognition? I looked at Dad's photo again, really looked at it. I love you, I said out loud to the empty room, but love doesn't mean I have to disappear. My phone buzzed, making me jump. Unknown number, local area code. The text preview made my heart skip. Laura, this is Richard. Matthews, your father's accountant. Need to discuss some irregularities I've noticed. Can we meet privately? Prefer somewhere quiet. Richard? I hadn't heard from him since before the wedding. He'd worked with Dad for over 20 years, handled everything from taxes to investment planning. If he was reaching out now, my fingers shook slightly as I replied, yes. When and where? Tomorrow morning, 7:30? The Garden Cafe on Pine Street. I knew the place, small, tucked away, mostly empty that early, perfect for private conversations. I'll be there, I typed. I stared at the exchange, mind racing. Richard had access to all of Dad's finances, past and present. He would have seen every transfer, every account change. What had he noticed that my attorney hadn't found? And why reach out now, after months of silence? The folders on my screen suddenly felt incomplete, like I'd been working, with only half the puzzle pieces. I checked the time, almost 1 a.m. 6.5 hours until I'd find out what irregularities had caught Richard's attention. Sleep wasn't happening. I made fresh coffee and went back to organizing files, this time with a new energy. Whatever Richard had seen, I wanted to be ready. I arrived at the Garden Cafe 20 minutes early, chose a corner table with sight lines to both exits, and ordered mint tea to settle my nerves. The morning crowd was thin, just a few regulars hunched over newspapers and laptops. Richard walked in exactly at 7:30, precise as the financial statements he'd managed for decades. His silver hair was neatly combed, his tie perfectly knotted. You know those people who radiate steadiness? That was Richard, the kind of man who probably balanced his checkbook to the penny every month. Laura, he said warmly, setting his briefcase on the chair. Thank you for meeting so early. Thanks for reaching out. I slid the chronology folder across the table. I've put together a timeline of everything that's happened since the wedding. He ordered black coffee, no sugar, and opened the folder with methodical care. I watched his expression as he read. The slight tightening around his eyes, the way his jaw set. When he looked up, there was something harder in his face. I resigned 3 weeks ago, he said quietly. After 22 years, my tea went cold in my hands. What happened? Valerie started restricting my access to certain accounts, rushed through transfers without proper documentation. When I raised concerns, he shook his head. Your father always valued careful oversight. Now suddenly everything's urgent and private. Have you ever felt hope and dread collide? Like finally seeing a path forward, but knowing it leads somewhere dark? Richard opened his laptop, angled it so we both could see. Look at these patterns. He pulled up a spreadsheet, each line meticulously highlighted. Money orders to a vendor that doesn't exist. Payment dates that align perfectly with capital injections into Horizon Tech. Horizon Tech? The name sparked recognition. Isn't that your new stepbrother's failing startup? Yes. Richard's finger traced the columns. 6 transfers in the last month alone, each just under the threshold that would trigger additional oversight. My palms felt hot against the ceramic mug. The anger that had been burning since the wedding cooled into something sharper, more focused. Strategy crystallized from chaos. Can we prove it? I asked. Richard nodded slowly. We'll need copies of all invoices, both sides of the transaction, bank records showing recipient accounts, every approval with timestamps. He pulled out a notepad, started writing in his precise accountant's hand. Most importantly, we need to document who had authorization for each transfer. The espresso machine behind the counter hissed, punctuating his words like an exclamation point. Around us, the cafe's morning rhythm continued, cups clinking, phones chiming, lives moving forward. But at our table, time felt suspended in possibility. I still have access to the archive room, Richard said. Boxes of pre-Valerie statements, original documents. We should start there. He checked his watch. My office, Thursday morning. I'll pull everything relevant. I thought about the files waiting on my computer, the folders of emails and scanned papers. Pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known I was solving. Thursday works. Richard closed his laptop with a decisive click. Laura. His voice was gentle, but firm. What they did at that wedding, seating you with the children, that was deliberate cruelty. But this, he tapped the spreadsheet, this is fraud. The word hung between us, solid as stone. I remembered Dad's voice in those old voicemails. You've always been practical, Laura. You understand the importance of documentation. Yes, Dad, I do. What's our timeline? I asked Richard. Probate deadline is 6 months from the will reading. After that, he didn't need to finish. We both knew what it meant. Accounts would be locked, transfers permanent. I counted backward in my head. That gives us 17 weeks, Richard confirmed. Can you come by Thursday at 8? We'll need every minute. The next morning, I met Richard at his office before the rest of the world punched in. His desk had that organized chaos only accountants master, stacks of folders with cryptic numbers, post-its forming some secret code along the edges of his computer screen. Let's talk timeline, he said, pulling out a fresh legal pad. Probate court has strict deadlines. Miss them, and it doesn't matter what evidence we find later. You ever have one of those moments where reality hits you like a bucket of ice water? That was me, watching Richard draw a simple timeline on that yellow paper. 6 months from the will reading, he explained, marking dates with his precise handwriting. That's our window to submit evidence of misconduct. After that, joint accounts become permanent. Transfers can't be reversed. I went home and pulled out the oversized calendar in my kitchen, the one where I tracked the kids' activities and bill due dates. With a thick black marker, I wrote the deadline in letters you could see from across the room. Then I circled the midpoint in red. 3 months to gather proof, 3 months to file everything properly. Remember when time felt infinite? I muttered to no one in particular. Richard and I developed a system. Every morning I'd send targeted records requests to different departments at Dad's bank. Richard drafted an affidavit template that looked innocuous enough, just asking bank employees to confirm basic transaction details. But the careful wording left room for them to mention any unusual patterns they'd noticed. Have you ever organized a war room? That's what my dining table became. Laptop open, legal pad ready, phone set to record. Every conversation got logged. Time, name, what was said. Even the brush-offs mattered, especially when the same phrases kept popping up. I'll need to check with compliance. That's marked confidential. You should speak with Mrs. Bennett directly. Mrs. Bennett. That's what they called Valerie now. But we weren't empty-handed. 2 partial email threads surfaced from a sympathetic clerk. The first mentioned prioritizing liquidity for immediate opportunities. The second talked about temporary transfers to secure emerging market position. Corporate speak for moving money fast and asking questions, never. I was actually feeling optimistic. Really. The puzzle pieces were aligning, each document adding weight to our case. Then the certified letter arrived. You know that sick feeling when you see official letterhead? The way your stomach drops before you even read the words? Yeah, that. Dear Ms. Bennett, it began. Always a bad sign when they use your maiden name. This letter serves as formal notice regarding your harassment of residents at 42 Olive Grove. I had to read it twice. Harassment? I'd tried to visit Dad once in the home where I'd grown up. Rang the doorbell like a civilized person. When no one answered, I left a note in the mailbox asking him to call. But Valerie's letter painted a different picture. According to her, I'd been repeatedly attempting unauthorized entry and causing distress to the household. She demanded I cease all direct contact attempts or face legal consequences. I recognized the strategy immediately. Classic misdirection. Change the story before the real story breaks. Paint me as the unstable daughter, the troublemaker who couldn't accept Dad's new happiness. Make any evidence I gathered look like the desperate acts of a woman with a grudge. Clever, Valerie. Very clever. The real problem? Dad's home office. That's where he kept the original documents for everything. Property deeds, account agreements, handwritten notes about promises made. The office where he'd sat me down last year and walked through his plans for the grandchildren's education. Everything's arranged, he'd said. You'll never have to worry. Now those papers were behind a door I couldn't legally approach, and the clock kept ticking. I spread the harassment letter on my kitchen counter, right next to the calendar with its bold deadline. 17 weeks left. Richard's words from our first meeting echoed, "We need every minute." The irony wasn't lost on me, being legally barred from my childhood, home by a woman who'd only lived there 3 months. But that's the thing about paper wars. They're won with documentation, not dignity. I picked up my phone to call Richard. We needed a new strategy, and fast. I followed Valerie's rules to the letter. No visits, no notes, no attempts to contact Dad at the house. Each time I drove past Olive Grove, my chest tightened at the sight of Dad's car in the driveway. But I kept going. You know what's worse than being banned from your childhood home? Knowing all your history sits locked inside it. Those boxes in Dad's office told our whole story. Birthday cards I'd made him in grade school. Report cards he'd proudly filed away. Photos from the day he taught me to balance a checkbook at his desk, telling me, "Smart money management is freedom, Laura." Now those memories gathered dust behind a door I couldn't legally approach. Remember the TU college funds folder? Blue cardstock, Dad's neat handwriting listing deposit schedules and projected totals. All the planning we'd done for my kids' future, their grandfather's promise written in his precise accountant's hand. That folder sat in his bottom desk drawer, useless as scratch paper, now that Valerie had drained the accounts. "You look tired," Richard said when I met him at his office after hours. The fluorescent lights made everything feel slightly unreal, like we were conspirators in some low-budget thriller. But I might have something. He pulled out a stack of backup tapes. "Old habits die hard," he explained, powering up an ancient computer tower. I kept redundant copies of everything. Valerie thought she scrubbed the system when she locked me out, but... He smiled, that quiet accountant's smile. "Well, let's just say we never fully purge." We spent the next 4 hours reconstructing money flows. Every wire transfer, every suspicious invoice. Richard's backup data gave us the skeleton. We just had to connect the dots. "Look here," he said, pointing to a series of payments. "These invoices to VB Consulting all route through the same shell company, and the amounts match the cash infusions to her brother's business," I finished, feeling that familiar heat in my palms. But then we hit August, the month everything changed. The records showed gaps, missing transactions that should have been there. I slumped in my chair, defeat crawling up my spine. It's not enough, is it? Without those weeks, we can't prove the pattern. Richard didn't answer immediately. He was staring at a folder labeled Maintenance Records 2022 with an odd expression. What? I asked. This shouldn't be here, he muttered, opening it. These aren't… His eyes lit up. Laura, look at these split payments. They're disguised as routine maintenance costs. But the dates… I leaned forward, suddenly wide awake. The maintenance charges were broken into smaller amounts, just under the threshold that required Dad's direct approval. And they perfectly filled the gaps in our August timeline. My hands shook as I added the numbers to our spreadsheet. We had it, the full pattern of systematic draining, dressed up as legitimate expenses. But something still nagged at me. There has to be more, I said, rubbing my eyes. It was nearly 11 p.m. The email trail feels incomplete. It is, Richard agreed. Valerie used a mirrored server for company correspondence, standard practice for backup purposes, but it would have everything, I finished. Every email, every deleted draft. I stared at our evidence pile. Solid, but not quite bulletproof. The probate. Deadline loomed like a guillotine blade. 1 shot left. Subpoena the mirror server before our window closed. You ever stand at the edge of a high dive, knowing the longer you wait, the harder it gets? That's where I was. We had enough to make noise, maybe even force a settlement. Walking away now wouldn't be surrender. It would be sensible, safe. Dad's voice echoed in my head. Smart money management is freedom. But this wasn't about money anymore. This was about truth. I pulled the subpoena template closer and started filling in details. The office clock ticked past midnight as I typed the final line. Richard studied my face. You sure about this? Server subpoenas can take weeks to process. I sealed the request in an envelope. How many weeks do we have? 11 until the probate deadline. Just enough time, maybe. If everything went perfectly, if the server hadn't been wiped, if Valerie's lawyers didn't block us, if. The courier's call woke me at 7 a.m. Server mirror delivery for Ms. Bennett? I threw on yesterday's clothes and practically sprinted to meet him. The package felt surprisingly light for something that might save everything. Just a sealed envelope with 3 encrypted drives inside. You know that moment when you're holding something precious but fragile? Like carrying eggs from the store, knowing one wrong move means cleanup? That's how those drives felt in my hands. I called Richard while pulling out of my parking spot. They're here. Meet you in 20? I'm already at the office, he said. Bring coffee. We'll need it. The early morning streets were quiet, just delivery trucks and a few dedicated joggers. I stopped at our usual cafe, ordered Richard's triple espresso, and tried not to vibrate out of my skin with nervous energy. The barista probably thought I was having a breakdown, the way I kept checking my bag to make sure the drives were still there. Richard was waiting at his office door, looking fresh despite the early hour. Some people just have that accountant gene. They could be announcing the apocalypse and still keep their tie straight. Let's see what Valerie's been hiding, he said, leading me to a clean workstation he'd set up. The monitor glowed in the dim office, like a beacon of hope. First came the boring but crucial part. Verifying file hashes to prove nothing had been tampered with. Richard handled that while I paced, probably wearing a track in his carpet. Stop hovering, he said mildly. Authentication takes time. How much time? I asked, knowing I sounded like an impatient kid. He gave me that patient look teachers use on students who keep asking, "Are we there yet?" About 20 more minutes. Why don't you review our exhibit list while we wait? I tried, really tried, but my eyes kept drifting to the progress bar on his screen. Finally, Richard sat back. We're in. Archives are intact and indexed. We started with Valerie's sent folder, working backward from the dates when the largest transfers happened. It took less than an hour to find the first smoking gun. There, I said, pointing at the screen. The email thread was short but damning. Valerie writing to her brother, "Route it through the vendor. Father trusts me completely now. Just keep the individual amounts under his radar." My hands shook as I printed that one. The timestamp matched perfectly with the first major transfer to her brother's business. Index that as Exhibit A1, Richard said, handing me a yellow sticky tab. And Laura, breathe. I hadn't realized I was holding my breath. The magnitude of what we'd found, what we could prove, was starting to hit me. We spent the next 3 hours building our case file. Every email got an exhibit number. Every falsified invoice got tagged and cross-referenced. I created a master timeline showing how the transfer patterns aligned with Valerie's messages. Look at this one, Richard said around noon, pointing to another thread. Valerie again, this time to her lawyer. Once the joint accounts are established, we can move everything. The old man won't even notice. The old man. My father. The man who'd trusted her enough to marry her, to give her access to everything he'd built. My chest felt tight. I called my attorney from Richard's office phone. How soon can you file an emergency motion? With sufficient cause? Today? Why? I have proof. Emails, transfers, everything. But the probate deadline is in 3 days, she finished. Get me the evidence package by 2 p.m. I'll clear my schedule. Richard and I did one final review. Emails, chronological and indexed. Bank statements, highlighted and annotated. Transfer records, matched to Valerie's authorizations. But something nagged at me. Richard, where's the master authorization? The one where Dad signed over initial access? Richard frowned, scrolling through our exhibits. It should be here. Every other approval is documented. We went through the archives again. Nothing. That one crucial signature, the one that started everything, was missing from the server. Could she have kept it off the system? I asked, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. Richard adjusted his glasses, thinking. Smart money says she did. A paper copy maybe, or stored somewhere else entirely. I stared at our evidence pile. It was solid, devastating even. But that one missing signature. The clock on Richard's wall seemed to tick louder with each passing second. I couldn't sleep that night. You know how your mind just keeps spinning when everything's on the line? Around 4 a.m., I gave up trying and headed back to Richard's office. He'd given me the spare key, saying sometimes the quiet hours were when clarity struck. Have to admit, there's something almost peaceful about an empty office building before dawn. The security guard recognized me by now. Early bird today, Miss Bennett? More like never left the nest, I said, managing a tired smile. I spread our exhibit list across Richard's conference table, this time working backward. Sometimes you need to flip your perspective to spot what's hiding in plain sight. The coffee maker gurgled in the corner. Richard had it set on a timer, bless him. You ever notice how the brain works differently in that gray space between night and morning? I was reorganizing the PDF folders for the 100th time when something caught my eye. A cache folder, tucked in a subfolder of archived vendor approvals. My hands weren't even steady enough to hold the coffee cup anymore. Please, I whispered to no one in particular. Please be something useful. The folder contained automated backups of signature authorizations. Most were routine stuff, office supplies, utility, payments. But there it was. Valerie's electronic signature on a temporary vendor loan approval. The amount matched exactly with the first transfer to her brother's business. The timestamp was perfect. I heard the office door open as Richard arrived. Thought I might find you here. Richard, look at this. I pointed to the screen. She used her e-signature access to approve the first transfer as a vendor loan. He leaned in, adjusting his eyeglasses, which means she knowingly misclassified the transaction. That's not just sloppy bookkeeping, that's intentional misconduct. My attorney's office opened at 8 a.m. I was in her parking lot at 7:45, practically bouncing with nervous energy. When she finally arrived, I thrust the updated evidence package at her. We need to file this morning, I said. The deadline is still 4 days away, she finished, flipping through the new exhibits. This is good, Laura. Very good. Give me an hour to format everything for filing. The drive to the courthouse felt surreal. Every red light was an eternity. Every green light was too fast. My attorney kept reviewing key points while I tried to remember how to breathe normally. The clerk's office was exactly what you'd expect. Fluorescent lights, the smell of old paper, and the quiet rustle of justice grinding along. We filed the petition to freeze the accounts and attached our evidence boxes. The timestamp showed 10:47 a.m., 4 days before the probate deadline would have sealed everything forever. "Now we wait," my attorney said. "Could be weeks before—" Her phone buzzed. She checked the message and raised her eyebrows. "Or not. Judge Matthews has an opening tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp." I gripped the counter to steady myself. "Tomorrow?" "Sometimes the system works fast." She gathered our copies, especially when there's evidence of active fund transfers. The next morning, I arrived early and watched the courthouse steps like a hawk. Valerie showed up at 8:55, wearing a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. A silver-haired attorney I didn't recognize walked beside her, carrying a leather briefcase that screamed, "Expensive." They passed me without a glance. Valerie's smile was hard as porcelain. Inside the courtroom, everything felt amplified. The scratch of pen on paper, the creak of wooden benches, even my own heartbeat. The air smelled like furniture polish and old books. Judge Matthews entered precisely at 9. She was younger than I expected, with sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Given the volume of exhibits," she said, reviewing the file, "and my packed calendar, we'll set strict time limits. Each side has 30 minutes to present their core arguments. No repetition, no dramatics." She looked up. "Is that understood?" Everyone nodded. I wrapped my fingers around the courtroom rail, feeling the smooth wood under my palms. The same wood my father had probably touched during his business dealings over the years. 30 minutes to prove what had taken months to uncover. 30 minutes to show a judge that this wasn't just messy family dynamics. It was calculated theft. My attorney stood, exhibits ready. Valerie's mask of confidence flickered for just a moment. "You know those moments when time seems to stretch like taffy?" That's how it felt when I took the stand. The courtroom wasn't particularly full, but every face seemed to loom larger than life. My throat went dry as I raised my right hand for the oath. "Start with the wedding reception, Mrs. Bennett," my attorney directed. I caught Valerie's smirk from the corner of my eye. She probably thought this was just sour grapes about seating arrangements. But that's exactly where the pattern started, and I needed the judge to see it. "I found my place card at the children's table," I said, keeping my voice steady. When I asked Valerie about it, she told me they had to prioritize. I described the setup, the crayon packs, the booster seats, the whispers and stares. It wasn't a mistake. It was the first public step in erasing me from my father's life. Judge Matthews made a note. "And how does this connect to the financial matters before us?" "It established the pattern," I explained. "First social isolation, then financial exclusion. Within weeks, Valerie had intercepted all my attempts to speak with my father. Then came the changes to his accounts. My attorney guided me through the timeline. I pointed to each transfer, matching fabricated invoices to shell vendors, then following the money to its final destination, Valerie's brother's failing business. "This document shows the first transfer of $50,000, I said, indicating the exhibit. The vendor was listed as Summit Solutions LLC, a company that existed only on paper. Richard had organized everything beautifully. Each transaction had its own color-coded tab, making it easy to demonstrate the pattern. 3 transfers became 6, then 12. The amounts grew larger, bolder. "And how did you discover these discrepancies?" the judge asked. Richard Morton, my father's longtime accountant, noticed irregularities after Valerie limited his access. He kept backup archives of all transactions, standard accounting practice. Richard took the stand next. I watched him methodically authenticate each document, his calm professionalism lending weight to every word. When he detailed the dates of Valerie's approvals, her expression turned to stone. "The pattern is clear," Richard testified. "Money was systematically diverted through false vendors to support Ms. Turner's brother's business ventures, all without Mr. Bennett's direct knowledge." Then came our ace. "Your Honor, I direct your attention to Exhibit 47, my attorney said. The PDF cache containing Ms. Turner's electronic signature authorization. Objection! Valerie's attorney shot up. These documents weren't part of the original accounting records. Judge Matthews peered at him over her glasses. They appear to be standard system backups from the company's approval software. Overruled. The murmur that rippled through the courtroom told me everyone saw it now. The signature, the timestamp, the amount. It was like watching dominoes fall in slow motion. Valerie's carefully constructed facade cracked. She whispered furiously to her attorney, but the damage was done. The evidence wasn't just compelling, it was irrefutable. When I finished testifying, my fingers were trembling so badly I could barely manage the water glass in front of me. The judge called a 30-minute recess to review the complete file. Now, I'm sitting here, watching the second hand tick around the courtroom clock. Each click feels like a hammer blow. 30 minutes to learn if justice exists. 30 minutes to find out if I can protect what my father spent a lifetime building. I keep catching glimpses of Valerie across the room. She's typing frantically on her phone, probably warning her brother, the same brother who helped her orchestrate this whole scheme. I wonder if he knows his business is about to implode. The bailiff just announced Judge Matthews is returning. My attorney squeezes my arm reassuringly, but my heart is trying to pound its way out of my chest. Everything, my children's future, my father's legacy, my own vindication, hangs on what happens next. The judge's expression gives nothing away as she takes her seat. She shuffles her papers with deliberate care, and I swear I can hear every page rustle like thunder. "All rise!" the bailiff calls out. I stand on shaky legs, pressing my palms flat against the table to steady myself. This is it. The moment that will either restore everything or leave me starting over yet again. The click of Judge Matthews' gavel felt like a thunderclap in that hushed courtroom. Based on the overwhelming evidence presented, this court finds clear and convincing proof of financial misconduct, she began, her voice carrying to every corner. I hereby order an immediate freeze on all joint accounts pending. Full investigation. My legs went weak. I gripped the table edge as she continued. Furthermore, Valerie Turner is removed as signatory from all accounts associated with the Bennett estate, effective immediately. The original trust provisions will be reinstated as written. You know that moment when you've been holding your breath so long you forget how to exhale? That was me, right there. My attorney squeezed my arm as Judge Matthews went on. Given the nature and extent of the documented transfers, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for potential criminal investigation. She fixed Valerie with a steel-edged stare. The court takes a particularly dim view of systematic exploitation of elderly persons through their accounts. I risked a glance at Valerie. Her perfect makeup couldn't hide how the blood had drained from her face. She clutched her designer purse, like a shield, knuckles white. "Ms. Bennett," the judge addressed me directly, "you are hereby confirmed as the rightful heir and trustee per the original estate planning documents. The court clerk will provide certified copies of this order within the hour." Just like that, months of anxiety and uncertainty dissolved. The tightness in my chest loosened for the first time since that awful wedding reception. Remember all those guests who'd watched, me at the children's table, phones raised to capture my humiliation. They lined the corridor as we left the courtroom. Now their whispers painted a different picture. Can you believe what she did? All that money to her brother? Poor Mr. Bennett. Valerie swept past them, chin high, but you could see the cracks in her armor. Her carefully crafted image was crumbling in real time. No more sugar-sweet smiles or casual cruelties wrapped in politeness. The mask had fallen, and everyone saw what lay beneath. The next morning, my attorney called with an update that sent a shiver of vindication down my spine. Valerie's brother's business had lost its credit line overnight. The bank, spooked by the court revelations about those mysterious cash infusions, pulled their support. Without that financial cushion, the whole house of cards collapsed. Years of deception, undone in hours. I signed the restoration documents in the trust office, each stroke of the pen feeling like reclaimed ground. The certified court order sat in my bag like a talisman as I walked out into the warm afternoon sun. The light hit differently now, less harsh, more hopeful. Driving home, I made an unplanned stop at the garden center. There was one last piece of this puzzle that needed placing. I chose a Queen Elizabeth rosebush, the kind my father had always tended in his garden, the one he'd taught me to prune and feed, showing me how patience and care yield the sweetest blooms. Back home, I knelt in my small garden plot, trowel in hand. A few neighbors walked by as I worked the soil, probably wondering why I was dressed for court while digging in the dirt. But this moment mattered, this simple act of putting down roots. The soil was rich and dark between my fingers as I planted that rose, just as my father had shown me. Water soaked into the ground, creating a dark circle that would help those roots take hold. Standing up, brushing dirt from my skirt, I felt steadiness return to my world. Not the same steadiness as before. Something harder won and more precious. Looking at that small bush, I whispered the truth I'd learned at such cost. Respect is not optional, it's earned.